So we've been going through Fromm's The Art of Loving, and he's made some pretty important points so far. One, the human experience is one of separation from reality, right? There are a lot of different ways that this has been symbolically and mythologically expressed. In the Bible, for example, basically the fall of humanity, right? Separation from God and the paradise that he set up for us. That is what is being signaled, at least in part, in that story. There are other myths, too, of people being forced, leaving paradise. This paradisal oneness with nature, with the universe. The anthropologist and anthropologist of religion, I would say, Mircea Eliade, argues in his works actually that basically religions are ritualistic devices to help humans reconnect with some sort of paradisical, heavenly experience that our everyday life is bereft of. So things like the Lord's Supper, the way Christian eschatology is structured, these things actually function to help close the separation that we feel and inherently experience as a result of our consciousness. Right? That was a big thing that Fromm was trying to get us to see, was that with consciousness comes consciousness of our experience, of our pain, of our suffering, of our weaknesses and deficiencies. And this stuff doesn't make us feel good, right? We don't get to live in blissful ignorance like the insects and the mammals who just respond to stimuli and prevent pain and suffering and try to reproduce. Right? We're actually aware of what's going on. We're aware of the past and the future, of our regrets, of our worries. And so this consciousness, it opens us up to acute forms of suffering. So, the primary human experience that we are trying to fix through a bunch of different strategies is overcoming this separation that we feel. We try to do this through orgiastic states, right, which distract us from this anxiety and this existential despair. We try to do it by conforming to a group. We try to do it by, according to Zappa, for example, tying ourselves to an ideology or a religion that gives our life meaning, anchoring ourselves to that. We do it through consumption. What Fromm has argued in these last two chapters is that all of those strategies are not permanent, right? When you take drugs or alcohol or engage in sex, that only temporarily distracts you. Soon enough again, you will feel the separation, the anxiety. So what humans have discovered, or perhaps invented, depends on how you look at these things, is that love is like the permanent solution to this problem of anxiety and separation that we feel. And so within this chapter, he's been looking at different kinds of love, what proper love looks like, and the different objects that we direct our love at. We've discussed brotherly love. Remember, this was the most fundamental kind of love which underlies all others, right? Kind of associated with that Greek philia that we've seen before. It is a love which kind of equalizes. It causes us to look at others as our equals in some sense, that are deserving of some inherent value and respect. They have some sort of intrinsic value. When we love this way, when we see each other through this lens, the differences dissolve away. We don't see race or gender or sex or nationality. We see fellow sufferers. right? Fellow human beings. And so it is a love that is between equals and directed towards those who we see as our equals, directed outwards towards others. And then there was motherly love. Motherly love is unconditional affirmation of that which we take to be helpless. Right? You can exhibit motherly love not just to children, not just to your own kids, but other people, right, that need your help. This is the kind of love that we embody when we help those who are in need. It's an unequal kind of love, right? It's a love that comes from the top down. Somebody is exercising this love on somebody that needs help. And if done properly, especially during parenting, if you exhibit the proper motherly love to your children, that will instill in them a love of life in general. They won't be afraid and anxious about all this. They will look at it with wonder and amazement and want to be part of it, right? And want to foster it. And then we looked at erotic love. If we're going to connect Greek words to these, I don't know, I guess we could call this storge, maybe. It's like kind of a natural kind of love that we want, that we feel towards those that are in some sense below us. Though, not below in other senses. I think you know what I mean. Erotic love would obviously come from eros. This is a kind of love that we've been investigating all along, right? It's shown up in like all the works that we've been looking at so far. It's characterized by a craving for complete fusion with another. Remember, this is kind of like a defining aspect of love, is that love involves unionization. The reason why we love is because we seek union to try to overcome that separation, that separateness that we feel from the rest of reality and others, and perhaps to ourselves. So erotic love is characterized by a craving for complete fusion with someone else, whereas brotherly love is universal. Right? We love all people. Our love is directed towards all people. Erotic love is not universal. Whereas brotherly love is inclusive of everybody. You're my brother and you're my brother and I love all of you. Erotic love is exclusive. Right? It's, no, I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with her. Get the fuck away. Right? So it's exclusive. Although it's easily confused with sexual desire. And you perhaps know this well enough if you've experienced it and you're wondering, do I just like him or do I just like the idea of him? Think on your own experience, right? So these are the three kinds of love that we looked at last time. But there are two kinds of love that Fromm looked at in this section that I asked you to read for today. There is also love of self and love of God. Oops. And we might also say there is also fatherly love, right? Which we also looked at. Which is love that seeks to guide and correct and produce competence and confidence in the other. Our focus today, however, is going to be on these two kinds of love. What are these two kinds of love? Well, what do you think self-love is? If these kinds of love are directed towards other people, what is self-love directed at? Shout it out! Yourself, right, yeah. It's directed towards self. And Fromm says that this kind of love is required in order for you to properly love other people, which is interesting. He says if you're not engaging properly in self-love, you can't properly engage in these other kinds of love. And this is one big thing that we'll be talking about today. Ooh, this marker's good. Nothing gets me going like a good marker. I love this marker. They don't stay good for a long time. You know, that's the issue.
They're so fleeting.
Story of my life, yeah. So pretty self-explanatory, right? Love directed towards self. Although the characteristics that Fromm is going to give it might be a little bit different than what we think about it. One of the things, however, that he says, which I think you're going to agree with, is that self-love is not necessarily selfish or narcissistic. And he talks about this on pages 59 and 60. And it is not necessarily incompatible with love for others. Again, he's actually going to say, when properly understood, self-love is a necessary requirement for loving others properly. Reading from the book, here's what he says. We have now come to the basic psychological premises on which the conclusions of our argument are built. Generally, these premises are as follows. Not only others, but we ourselves are the object of our feelings and attitudes. Right? You can feel a way about yourself. You can do things for yourself. The attitudes towards others and towards ourselves, far from being contradictory, are basically conjunctive. With regard to the problem under discussion, this means love of others and love of ourselves are not alternatives. On the contrary, an attitude of love toward themselves will be found in all those who are capable of loving others. Love, in principle, is indivisible as far as the connection between objects and one's own self is concerned. Again, genuine love is an expression of productiveness. What does he mean by this? Love is an expression of what's alive in us, right? It's an expression of our aliveness, our spirit. It involves activity, right? It's the use of a kind of faculty. It's not just a feeling, it's an activity, it's a use, you might call it a use of a power. When we are loving, we are doing something. Genuine love is an expression of productiveness. That's what he means by this. And implies care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. It is not an affect in the sense of being affected by somebody, but an active striving for the growth and happiness of the loved person, rooted in one's own capacity to love. To love somebody is the actualization and concentration of the power to love. The basic affirmation contained in love is directed toward the beloved person as an incarnation of essentially human qualities. Love of one person implies love of man, human, as such. The kind of division of labor, as William James calls it, by which one loves one's family but is without feeling for the stranger, is a sign of a basic inability to love. Love of man is not, as is frequently supposed, an abstraction coming after the love for a specific person, but it is its premise, although genetically it is acquired in loving specific individuals. From this, it follows that my own self must be as much an object of my love as another person. The affirmation of one's own life, happiness, growth, freedom, is rooted in one's capacity to love. That is, in care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. If an individual is able to love productively, he loves himself too. If he can love only others, he cannot love at all. So, Fromm is dropping some bombs on us here. Okay? First of all, what he says is, if you have the capacity to love and you're exercising it, you're going to direct it towards others and yourself. If you're directing your love just at others and you can't love yourself, what that means is you're not actually loving others. You're striving to love, but you're not quite doing it. You're reaching for it, but you're not quite succeeding. Because again, what loving is the use of a power. If you have this capacity, if you have this ability, you can direct it at other and self and God and family and humankind, all of it. If you find that you can only direct it at certain people, you don't actually have the ability. You need to work on that. So, self-love is not necessarily selfish or incompatible with love for others. Actually, if we are properly loving, we're going to love both self and other. Similarly, self-love is not the same as selfishness. This is a common misconception. Some people think, if you love yourself, you're being selfish. If you love yourself, you're narcissistic. No. Fromm is here to say that is not true at all. In fact, he's going to say something very strange. He's going to say, if you're selfish, you lack love for yourself. Talks about this on pages 60 and 61. Second full paragraph. Granted that love for oneself and for others in principle is conjunctive, how do we explain selfishness, which obviously excludes any genuine concern for others? The selfish person is interested only in himself, wants everything for himself, feels no pleasure in giving but only in taking. This is significant, right? Because love is always more so a giving, he said, than a receiving. The world outside is looked at only from the standpoint of what he can get out of it. Maybe we could say this is Stirner's view. Yeah? He lacks interest in the needs of others and respect for their dignity and integrity. He can see nothing but himself. He judges everyone and everything from its usefulness to him. He is basically unable to love. Does not this prove that concern for others and concern for oneself are unavoidable alternatives? This would be so if selfishness and self-love were identical. But that assumption is the very fallacy which has led to so many mistaken conclusions concerning our problem. Selfishness and self-love, far from being identical, are actually opposites. So if you're a selfish person, actually what that means is you do not have proper love for yourself. It's an interesting little paradox. How does he explain that? Here's how. The selfish person does not love himself too much, but too little. In fact, he hates himself. The lack of fondness and care for himself, which is only one expression of his lack of productiveness, leaves him empty and frustrated. He is necessarily unhappy and anxiously concerned to snatch from life the satisfactions which he blocks himself from attaining. He seems to care too much for himself, but actually he only makes an unsuccessful attempt to cover up and compensate for his failure to care for his real self. Freud holds that the selfish person is narcissistic, as if he had withdrawn his love from others and turned it toward his own person. It is true that selfish persons are incapable of loving others, but they are not capable of loving themselves either. Okay, so why would he say this? Why would he say that selfishness and self-love are actually opposites? How could somebody who is selfish and is just thinking me, 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 I'm going to get all this for me, 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 how does that show they don't love themselves? How does that track?
Because that comes from a place of insecurity. You don't actually want those things because you want them. You want those things because you don't have them. And I think that that's like very different. It's because like you lack something in yourself that you like desire from others, even if it's not, something that you need or something that's really reflective of the thing that you need. Like you want attention not because you want attention, but because you aren't like given attention by the right places or the right sources. So you like overexert yourself and really try to get that attention from like the wrong places, or like you're selfish because you're afraid of scarcity. Things like that.
I like what you said at first when you were talking about, what you implied is that the selfish person has a lack.
Yeah.
Right? If you're selfish and you're just looking out at the world as to what it can do for you, like, oh, I want that, I want this, I'm going to take that from you, I'm going to use you to get this. What that implies is a lack of security, a lack of contentment. What that implies is you don't have something, so you're going to try to steal it from the world. What is it that you don't have? What would make you feel complete?
Love for yourself.
If you loved yourself, what else would you need? Right? The reason why we do half the shit that we do is because we're trying to compensate for this lack. Right? We don't love ourselves, so we seek validation from others. We try to get that externally. We don't love ourselves, so we try to fill up our lives with all these material possessions. We don't love ourselves, so we think that what's going to make us happy is out there, and we just need to make all of this right out here. Fromm's like, no. The selfish person does not love themselves too much. The selfish person, what they reveal through their actions is they don't love themselves enough. That's why they're seeing and acting the way that they are. They're trying to fill a hole in their heart that only they can provide. Which is why they're never satisfied, right? Never satiated with getting all this stuff. That's why you see rich people who are unhappy, right? They have everything in the world. They don't have love for themselves. They can't accept themselves, some fundamental part of themselves, right?
I think it also comes from a place of never wanting to experience pain or discomfort.
Yeah? Yeah.
So, like, you don't want to do the hard work of, like, actually loving yourself and doing what you're supposed to be doing. So you, like, take the shortcuts and feel even shittier.
It is hard, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, life is full of pain and struggle and suffering. That's hard to deal with. We like to be comfortable, right? We like our luxuries. We like the convenience and the ease of what we've set up for ourselves. That's why you still order stuff on Amazon, right? And you're not going to the mom and pop shop down the road taking 15 minutes out of your day to walk there, right? Because it's easier. You just click a few buttons and it shows up at your fucking door, right? We love our convenience. Yes.
And I think we wouldn't be, like, as unhappy, like, if we were just brought up as fun opportunities instead of just hardships. Because like
Yeah.
if you think about like any board game you play, like there's rules and regulations, and like part of the fun is like you don't just get it immediately. So like that's kind of the whole purpose of life is like the challenges and the obstacles.
A lot of people have said this. This is not a novel idea, but a lot of people basically echoing that will say, we've messed with our own brain circuitry by creating all this technology that gives us immediate gratification. Right? And now that we've gotten used to that, we don't want to do any of the hard stuff. Right? Because we can just get gratification and rushes of dopamine by doing this with our thumbs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. So, if you really love yourself, you're not going to be selfish. Actually, if you really love yourself, in some way that is going to be intimately bound up with love for others and love for God. If we want to master the art of loving, we need to love ourselves, which is very hard to do. But we're not screwed, right? We keep reading this book, maybe we'll get some good ideas and good experiments we can run, principles we can try out. In any case, it's not true that self-love and love for other people are incompatible. They're intimately connected. And he discusses this on page 63. At the very end of this section, these ideas on self-love cannot be summarized better than by quoting Meister Eckhart on this topic. If you love yourself, you love everybody else as you do yourself. As long as you love another person less than you love yourself, you will not really succeed in loving yourself. But if you love all alike, including yourself, you will love them as one person, and that person is both God and man. Thus, he is a great and righteous person who, loving himself, loves all others equally. This is going to transition us into what Fromm is going to have to say about love of God, which is going to be intimately bound up with proper love of self and other. Now I know what you're thinking. Love of God? I don't even believe that God exists. What? We're supposed to love God? What the hell does that mean? What is God? Well, Fromm's got your back. All right? Because I don't think he really believes that that God exists. At least not in the way that Western Protestant Christianity expresses it. I don't think he believes that God is a person in a different realm that's watching us. Instead, what he means by this term God is the ultimate reality of human life. And throughout human history, this has come in a variety of forms and symbols and concepts. Part of what he does in this section where he talks about love of God is he describes the evolution of human religion and this concept of God. So, for some people, God is a person. For some people, God is a value or an idea, the ground of being, or something else. Depending on what stage of religious understanding and devotion you are at, you're probably going to have a different concept of God. God has meant many different things to many different people. But if we understand properly what God is, or at least what God represents, we will be able to love ourselves and others. Because it's all connected in some interesting psychological and symbolic way that Fromm tries to describe for us here. This section is probably a little confusing, so I'm going to provide some very general sketches. Okay? What Fromm basically tries to argue or provide in this section is an analysis of how humans have thought about God throughout history. Who or what God is, he says, or at least implies, depends on the stage of human development that somebody is in. So, at first, what was worshipped as God or gods were things that were inherently natural. Like the climate, weather phenomena, animals, natural disasters were seen as evidence of God's messing with things, right? Canyons and formations and the sea, natural things. So at the beginning of human societies, this ultimate reality of human life was taken to be natural stuff. And he tries to provide support for this by, looking at what human societies worshipped and the kind of rituals and religions they had thousands of years ago. Like you can imagine in your head your own stereotypical small primitive tribal society or something. Like what would they worship? The animal spirits. Maybe eventually they would, make artworks and artifacts based on different animals and natural forms. At first, these were just conceptions, but then eventually we began producing images of these things, like totems, right? Or fetishes. You guys familiar with the other definition of fetish? Right? Not just, a sexual thing, but like a symbol of religious significance. An inanimate object worshipped for its supposed magical powers, or is because it is considered to be inhabited by a spirit, Google says. So, human societies, generally, their development went from the worship of natural forms to artifacts, idols, and various images of gods. Then he argues, which is controversial today, historians are still in disagreement about this, that the development of human religion proceeded through a matriarchal phase, where matriarchal themes and symbols had taken precedence in human thought and life. So, the Great Mother was worshipped. Mother Earth, you can think about it like that. The basic point here being that as we developed consciously and culturally, our understanding and worship of God changed. So the next phase in our evolution was matriarchal God or gods, matriarchal religions. And then, where do you think it goes? Patriarchal God or gods and religions. Yeah, exactly. This would be things like Christianity, right? Islam, Judaism, where God is imagined and taken to be like a father figure, right? Now, it didn't stop here. The evolution of our religions and our concepts of God has evolved since the very beginning of, or the emergence of these things. So even within patriarchal religions, Fromm argues that if we look at the Bible and what the Old Testament is like compared to the New Testament, there was an evolution in thought as to what God the Father was like, how he acted, what he wanted, how we are supposed to live as Christians, for example. So the idea of God continued to evolve within patriarchal religions. And he says that this is because humans continue to mature, to develop mentally, culturally, in their mastery of the world and their understanding of the world. Consequently, our religious and cultural concepts continue to evolve as a result of this maturation, alongside this maturation. So how is God symbolized in the first few books of the Bible? What is he like? Does anybody know?
Almost tyrannical.
Almost tyrannical? Okay, say more. Yeah, what is God like? What does he do?
He lays down the law.
Ugh, yeah, right. Crushes Israel's enemies. You guys aren't listening to me. All right, you're going to get invaded now. Right? Yeah, there's a sense of like violence. You might even say tyranny. During this stage of religious evolution within patriarchal religions, Fromm says that at first God is conceptualized as something like a despotic tribal chief. Like a tyrant, kind of, right? How does the concept of God evolve? Where does it go from here?
He becomes more loving and more like a father as it goes on.
Right, exactly, yeah. That's what Fromm says. He says at first, God kind of comes off as a tyrannical dick. But then humans start thinking and conceiving of God as a more loving father. Somebody who is trying to guide and help and produce competence and confidence, not just somebody who is ruling arbitrarily with an iron fist. So the concept of God morphs into loving father. And it's important to note, too, that while Fromm is describing kind of stages of human religious and cultural development, individuals also go through these stages themselves. So even if, for example, a culture is here, there might be some in that culture that are back, or there are different places in this evolution. Okay? What he's describing here is just kind of the general evolution. Obviously, there are going to be some people lagging behind and some people who are ahead, if we could use those words. Where does he go after this? Where do humans go? If you think of the evolution, more specifically of Christianity, what is God taken to be perhaps in the New Testament? or the end of the Old Testament into the New Testament. In the Bible, we see the emergence of Jesus, God's Son, who, psychologically speaking, Jung, for example, would say represents the highest ideal or the perfected self. So what does God become? He goes from despotic tribal chief in people's minds to loving father to what?
Ultimate mentor.
Yeah, kind of like that. Like these two phases, God is conceived of more so as a person, but then the evolution of religious consciousness.
He becomes like a spiritual, like almost like an idea. Like he becomes like a manner of like
Yeah.
being or like teaching. Like he's like more of like an ideological lesson as opposed to like a physical person.
Right, and like think of like what Unitarians practice and think, right? Like, yeah, God becomes not so much a person in the next stage of a religious development, but in people's minds ascends higher to be like a concept or a symbol of virtue, of goodness, of perfection, more symbolic and conceptual in nature. I'm going to write symbol of virtue because I like that.
Okay.
Because virtue both means goodness and excellence, right? And that is how people conceive of God, a lot of people nowadays. God to them isn't primarily a person with a consciousness. God is like, for God, that's like the way we should act, man. You know? It's like an idea or a concept or a symbol of what is good and right, virtuous and excellent. And you'll see this if you've had your own spiritual journey, right? Maybe you went from, God was a person to, now I just kind of see God as the divine one that pervades everything and like it's perfect and, right? This would be like a deistic conception of God or a panentheistic conception of God, maybe. So God becomes a symbol or an idea or a standard. And then finally, if we continue along and we look at the ways, for example, that Eastern religions conceive of God, even though they don't use that word, or what some Western thinkers eventually came to believe and express, which is known as apophatic theology. Does anybody know what apophatic theology is? It's not something that we get a lot in the Western world, in Western Christianity. It's something that's prioritized in Orthodox Christianity.
Is it maybe like instead of like a figure that you like worship, like a god, it's like a set of ideas or like a way of being that you have?
Yeah, kinda.
Like food?
Yeah. So think about.
Like a spirituality.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff that's going on in this development, this evolution. That's part of it. Yes. Think about how Western Protestantism conceives of God. God is a person or a consciousness outside of his creation that has a plan for us, that wants to connect with us, and who loves us.
Is it like we're all God?
Maybe.
The people of God. Like,
Maybe.
Like,
So it kind of like just a force that's just like, I guess the way I think of God is just like intelligent infinity, just like constantly creating.
Notice the language that you use, right? In Lutheranism and Calvinism and in these forms of Christianity that we practice in the Western world, in Europe and in the U.S., mostly in the U.S., God is described positively. God is all powerful. God is all good. God is all knowing. right? Assigning positive attributes to God. Jesus is God. God is perfect. God is loving. The next stage, Fromm says, in religious development is the recognition that no positive attribute encapsulates or defines God. Why? All of the categories and terms and language that we try to use to describe this thing misses the mark. God is more than that. God is beyond that. We can't accurately really describe God using any of our language and categories. We can only describe God in terms of what God is not. God is not evil. God is not bad. God is not stupid. So the next evolution, the next phase, is almost like accepting the mystery that is this thing we call God, recognizing that our language and our ideas of God fall short, that God is bigger than that, that God is more than that. And we might then call God something like the inexpressible ground of being. Very mystical, kind of weird terminology, right? There's the idea that the God that you speak of is not the God that exists. Right? I know this sounds very strange, but I promise Fromm is going somewhere with this. That is, the evolution in religious consciousness recognizes that human knowledge and the ability to know God is extremely limited. Thus, there is a transformation in that humans give up trying to know God and emphasis is placed on experiencing God. Because our thought forms are always going to be deficient. So he talks about this on page 68. I'd like to just read that for you now, and then we can kind of talk about this a little bit. Since the evolution of the human race shifted from a mother-centered to a father-centered structure of society, as well as of religion, we can trace the development of a maturing love mainly in the development of patriarchal religion. In the beginning of this development, we find a despotic, jealous God who considers man, whom he created, as his property and is entitled to do with him whatever he pleases. This is the phase of religion in which God drives man out of paradise, lest he eat from the tree of knowledge, and thus could become God himself. This is the phase in which God decides to destroy the human race by the flood because none of them pleases him, because the world is so sinful, right? With the exception of his favorite son, Noah. This is the phase in which God demands from Abraham that he kill his only beloved son Isaac to prove his love for God by the act of ultimate obedience. But simultaneously, a new phase begins. God makes a covenant with Noah in which he promises never to destroy the human race again. A covenant by which he is bound himself. So, there is an evolution of religious consciousness from thinking God decides everything and is not bound to anything to God is actually bound in some sense to be loving, to be gracious, this is where the idea of the covenant comes in. Not only is he bound by his promises in this phase, he is also bound by his own principle, that of justice. And on this basis, God must yield to Abraham's demand to spare Sodom if there are at least 10 just men. You know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? In the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah were said to be these terrible, wicked cities where there were hardly no religious believers. And they were all doing sexual stuff to each other. And they were practicing homosexuality and all this stuff and raping people, apparently. Well, Abraham, one of his relatives, I believe it's his nephew, Lot, is living in the city. And God tells Abraham, I'm going to destroy these cities, man. These cities are just really fucked up. Like, we can't let this go on. Like, that's going to spread. Like, all this degeneration is going to get out. I'm taking the city out. And Abraham's like, no, like, promise me you won't take it out if there are 50 believers there. And God says, all right, I promise I won't take it out if there are 50. How about 40? All right. And then he whittles them down to 10. And he makes God promise he will not destroy the city if there are 10 believers to be found in it. There are not 10 believers to be found. God destroys the cities. But the idea is that, again, God is bound by something in this phase of religious consciousness, justice, morality, whatever. But the development goes further than transforming God from the figure of a despotic tribal chief into a loving father, into a father who himself is bound by the principles which he has postulated. It goes in the direction of transforming God from the figure of a father into a symbol of his principles, those of justice, truth, and love. God is truth. God is justice. In this development, God ceases to be a person, a man, a father. He becomes the symbol of the principle of unity behind the manifoldness of phenomena, of the vision of the flower which will grow from the spiritual seed within man. God cannot have a name. A name always devotes a thing or a person, something finite. How can God have a name if he is not a person, not a thing? The most striking incident of this change lies in the biblical story of God's revelation to Moses, who would lead the Israelites out of Egypt. When Moses tells him that the Hebrews will not believe that God has sent him to do this, unless he can tell them God's name, how could idol worshippers comprehend a nameless God, since the very essence of an idol is to have a name? God makes a concession. He tells Moses that his name is, I am becoming that which I am becoming, or I am that I am. I am becoming is my name. The I am becoming means that God is not finite, not a person, not a being. The most adequate translation of the sentence would be, tell them that my name is nameless. The prohibition to make any image of God, to pronounce his name in vain, eventually to pronounce his name at all, aims at the same goal. That of freeing man from the idea that God is a father, that he is a person. In the subsequent theological development, the idea is carried further in the principle that one must not even give God any positive attribute. To say of God that he is wise, strong, good, implies again that he is a person. The most I can do is to say what God is not, to state negative attributes, to postulate that he is not limited, not unkind, not unjust. The more I know what God is not, the more knowledge I have of God. Following the maturing idea of monotheism in its further consequences can lead only to one conclusion: not to mention God's name at all, not to speak about God. Then God becomes what he potentially is in monotheistic theology: the nameless one, in inexpressible stammer, referring to the unity underlying the phenomenal universe, the ground of all existence. God becomes truth, love, justice. God is I, inasmuch as I am human. So there we do see another stage of development. From despotic tribal tyrant to loving father guided by principles, to symbol of goodness and excellence, to we can't even talk about this thing at all, because talking about it, any terms or categories we use misses the mark, because we're limited, finite humans. And what that leads to, Fromm says, is the understanding that we cannot really talk about God at all, because God is bigger than that. And in some sense, maybe we are God or God is a part of us? What he's trying to lay out here is the evolution of religion and the concept of God. But this is not where he stops his analysis. What he's going to go on to describe is how these changing conceptions of God have an influence, obviously, on our behavior and on our societies. And he traces kind of the evolution of both Western and Eastern thought, and he compares them to one another. What he ends up concluding is that even if you don't believe in God as a person or as a father, God is still useful and necessary as a concept in order to love properly when understood in the later stages of religious development. So love of God should evolve and influence our thought and action, even if God doesn't exist. Now, I'd like to ask you, do you think that makes sense? Or do you think he's just... Can we do without this concept of God? Do we not need to invoke it at all?
I don't think that we shouldn't invoke it at all.
Okay, just change how we think about it, kind of like he's using here?
I don't think we need to change how we think about it, though I do appreciate the way that I haven't heard this type of thinking about it before, or at least not like this.
Wait until what I have to present
Yeah.
next for you, because we're going to look at how Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy differs, and how there's a lot of cool stuff that we could perhaps use in Eastern philosophy to...
I like Eastern philosophy a lot.
I was thinking about this a lot actually in the past week, and just to preface this, like when I was in high school, I took a theology class, and like for our first semester, like our entire thing was just watching this guy trying to prove like how there is like intrinsic evidence that like a creator is almost necessary for the universe to exist.
Okay.
And so one of his premises was like all of the planets in our solar system are moving away from a specific point at like a relative velocity. And so like with that, like we can pinpoint like a spot where like all of them at one time like were connected together, like basically just proving the Big Bang theory. But my point kind of is that like before that, like there obviously had to be kind of nothing if there was a start to the universe, and so God kind of has to exist outside of that. But if God is the only thing that exists, like there's not empty space, it's just God. So really everything I believe is kind of thoughts from God transmitted kind of into a physical reality.
Okay. So it's interesting that you say that, because that is going to line up with the evolution of Eastern thought that Fromm is going to bring in to help support this idea that this idea of God is still useful and perhaps necessary for us. Although, again, he doesn't believe in like the big man upstairs. Yeah. What you're kind of echoing there is kind of Eastern in its flavor.
Yeah, I would also say like just everybody is God, just at a different stage of being God, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds Eastern to me, kind of.
Yeah.
My understanding of Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism. So, are y'all just going to accept this? Like, God is a useful idea?
I mean, I've always had like a weird relationship with religion, because like I went to a Catholic school growing up, and that made me literally just fucking hate the idea of it.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, you're fucking dumb if you're religious. All these people are fucking dumb. They're all terrible human beings. Like, some bad shit happened in my school. Not to me, but, you know, in general. And, like, it just soured me to the idea of it. But, like, as I've grown and as I've learned and as I've changed, as people do, you know, I've grown to kind of understand God as not, like, I don't think that there is a religion, I don't think there is a spirituality that would be able to accurately assess and describe and, you know, understand God, if there is a God, which maybe there is. But I don't think that God is a dude. I don't think that God is like some guy.
He's not an old guy with a white beard,
I
right?
think that if God did exist, we probably wouldn't be able to see him. We wouldn't be able to comprehend him.
Like, for some reason, this image has stuck with me since I was a kid. Sometimes when I imagine God, like, I imagine this kind of, like, fat old guy with, like, a round face and a long white beard, and he's, like, hanging up there on the clouds, and he's, like...
You're seeing Santa on the clouds.
Yeah, kinda, but he's bald.
Oh, he's bald.
Doesn't have any...
Well, we don't... Santa wears his hat, so, like...
All right, he could be bald under there.
I think he just likes Santa.
One of the things that's always like interested me is people who claim to be of a certain religion or something completely disregard other ones.
Yeah.
And one of the, and how you said like human religious evolution has evolved from like the sun god to like the Olympians to
Right.
you know the Western and the Eastern ones. It's you know it's interesting how certain ones who, or certain people who claim certain religions don't just completely think the other ones aren't even real or don't even really think about them.
Yeah. Yeah, as we'll see, I think this kind of attitude, this behavior, and I think Fromm is going to actually argue with this, that kind of attitude and behavior falls out of the ways that we have constructed philosophy and logic in the Western world. So, as we'll see, Fromm's going to say, the reason why there is this emphasis on right belief, having the proper concept, is because we've based our philosophy on Aristotelian logic, which is very different than the way that Eastern societies and cultures understand the universe to be and how it works. So, yeah, what you're talking about is like, it's a deep and interesting problem.
Yeah. I think it's also rooted in like religions as well, because I'm pretty sure the Christian religion is real heavy on like not idolizing false prophets and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like against it.
Don't follow the wrong person.
You have to believe this.
Right. Yeah.
I think it just comes down to fear and conformity.
Yeah,
Like just
absolutely.
making people believe it just to twist your arm and do whatever you want.
Because they say the Catholic Church is more so aimed for power than anything else.
You're not the only one to think that. Yeah.
I don't know if I think it. That's what they
Yeah,
say.
no, yeah. I hear you.
I try to have an open mind about all that stuff. Just
Well, I think that's good.
Everything.
I don't think a lot of Catholics are trying to be bad people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. I think you're right though.
I feel like greed takes over heavy too.
Yeah.
Greed really
It's
takes
like
over.
businessmen.
Yeah.
A lot of businessmen aren't trying to be bad people, but they just do end up doing unethical things because they're businessmen and they have a lot of money.
And their mind gets twisted along the way because they might not want to do bad things, but eventually they might see it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And like the thing with like religious law and like religious ideals, things like commandments, whatever that may be across the different religions, like it's more about like trying to find the step-by-step guide to being godly, the step-by-step guide to being a good person, but in actuality, like the only way to do that is to just be. If that makes sense.
I love the word that you used. You said godly. We try to be godly, right? That's what these religions tell us to do. That flows right into what Fromm has to say next. Are you ready? On page 71. Oh.
Perfect segue.
All right. Inasmuch as this is so, The criticism of the idea of God, as it was expressed by Freud, is quite correct. The error, however, was in the fact that he ignored the other aspect of monotheistic religion, and its true kernel, the logic of which leads exactly to the negation of this concept of God. The truly religious person, if he follows the essence of the monotheistic idea, does not pray for anything, does not expect anything from God. He does not love God as a child loves his father or his mother. He has acquired the humility of sensing his limitations to the degree of knowing that he knows nothing about God. God becomes to him a symbol in which man, at an earlier stage of his evolution, has expressed the totality of that which man is striving for, the realm of the spiritual world, of love, truth, and justice. He has faith in the principles which God represents. He thinks truth, lives love and justice, and considers all of his life only valuable inasmuch as it gives him the chance to arrive at an ever fuller unfolding of his human powers, as the only reality that matters, as the only object of ultimate concern. And eventually he does not speak about God, nor even mention his name. To love God, if he were going to use this word, would mean then to long for the attainment of the full capacity to love, for the realization of that which God stands for in oneself. So he thinks that if we take the monotheistic theology to its conclusion, that would lead us to believe is that we should act godly. And what does that mean? It means loving properly. Because God is love, right? That is what the essence of God is supposed to be. God created the world because he loves us. He does what he does because he loves us. He sent his son to die on the cross for us because he loves us, right? So even if we stop believing in that, God to us represents love. And in that sense, if we're going to master the art of loving, love and the proper acting out of one's morality and religion are like intimately connected in this higher way of understanding what God is, if you're going to follow what Fromm says. And so what he goes into in these pages is why religion has developed the way that it has in the Western world, why it's gone through the evolution it has, why people, for example, in the U.S. don't have a lot of toleration for others who practice different religions, who are constantly trying to proselytize and save people. And what he says is a lot of Western thought and behavior that we see today surrounding religion and by religious zealots is downstream of the fact that our way of thinking in the Western world is based on the logic that Aristotle put forth thousands of years ago. You already follow this without, you don't even need to know what Aristotelian logic is, but this is how you think and this is how you divide up and see the world. What are some of the things Aristotelian logic says? Stuff like this. The principle of non-contradiction. Something cannot both be something and not the thing. So all of the world is either, depending whatever characteristic property you're looking at, is either A or not A. It's impossible for a thing to have and not have a property. It's based on this idea that the universe is dualistic. There's matter and there's minds, and that these are two different things and they're distinct.
What are minds?
Your mind.
Oh, okay.
There's high and there's low, and these things are distinct. There's hot and there's cold, and these things are totally different and distinct. There's like two sides to everything, right? Isn't this something that we say in English? And these two things are mutually exclusive, right? This is a table, it's not a chair. This is a cup, it's not a bowl, right? All of our categories and terms are exclusive. They each have their own essence. So there's this idea of exclusiveness and of duality, right? There's good and there's evil, and good and evil don't mix. They're two totally separate things, right? Not so with Eastern philosophy. What Fromm calls paradoxical logic. In Eastern thought, in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, in countries like Korea, Japan, Eastern Asia, their understanding of the world is not based on these concepts, on these ideas. They're different. If we wanted to contrast these fundamental ideas that Western thought is based on, we could say Eastern paradoxical thought, which again is what Fromm calls it, is based on the idea of the universe is one interconnected thing. It's one thing. It's not multiple things. The idea that you think this and this are different is just a surface level understanding. Ultimately, this is all part of the same one underlying thing. It's not a duality, it's a monism. There's a oneness. It's all part of the oneness. It's not so exclusive, it's more inclusive, right? Everything is a part of the oneness. This ultimately is not distinct from this. They're part of the same underlying interconnected one system. It's not based on this principle of non-contradiction. It's actually like, no, the oneness is like inherently oppositional and has a polarity to it.
What's the term they use to describe that? Is that Brahman or Atman? Brahma?
Yeah, are you talking about like Hinduism? Yeah. All that exists is Brahma.
Yeah.
Another way of putting that is everything that you see around you, do you know what all this is?
It's all God.
It's all God playing hide and seek with itself. That's what this is. So we are God, we're parts of God, we're just really good at playing hide and seek with ourselves. That's why we don't know that we're God. We're really good at like making ourselves forget that.
Like the universe experiencing itself.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be like an Eastern way of like viewing things. Yeah. In Hinduism, everything is Brahma. What we can call the one. Playing hide and seek with itself. So this is all kind of like a weird cosmic game that we've as God have decided to play. Very different from the idea that there's a God outside of time and space that created the world, right? No, all of this is God. We're God. You're God. That's God. This is God. Ugh.
What do they say about so what do the Eastern philosophers have to say about what came before the Big Bang? Was that the same thing? Or do they?
No, I mean they vary on what they say. You could think like in Hinduism or Buddhism that time is cyclical. If there was a beginning, there's going to be an end, and then there's going to be another beginning, and it's going to go on forever. And Taoism has the similar idea. In Taoism, everything is a part of the Tao, the way, the flowing of the universe. So you're a part of the Tao. The marker's a part of the Tao. Everything is the Tao, although we can't say that truthfully, because even using the word Tao to refer to all this is missing the mark. All right, because we can't encapsulate or know the flowings and operations of the universe all collected. It's not something we can think or know with our minds.
Even though that sounds more complicated, to me that is far simpler to understand than he turned water to wine. To me, the idea of this just universal energy or whatever the hell is very comprehensible.
It's fairly simple,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's because the systems of thought are based on different fundamental ideas, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm going to talk to my students about next week, because I'm giving a lecture on Taoism, is the fundamental split between Western religions and Eastern religions is that Western religions prioritize thought. Having the right thought, having the right belief, having the right concept. That's not the way Eastern religions see things. It's not about having the right thought. Our thought is always going to miss in some sense. It's about having the proper experience or engaging in the proper action. And this is what Fromm tries to reveal in these pages. What he tries to get us to see by bringing in Eastern philosophy is that love of God is not to be obtained through thought, but through action or experience. This is why in the Eastern religions, for example, there isn't this emphasis on you got to have the right idea. No, the emphasis is on stop thinking about this shit. Thinking about it is getting in the way of you experiencing God. Thinking about it is causing you to be in error. You got to stop the thinking and the trains of logic. When a student is trying to learn the way, Taoism, or learn how to be a good Buddhist, the master teaches not like I am doing, by giving you concepts. They teach by direct pointing. What they mean by that is, I can't tell you what the experience is like. You're just going to have to grasp it at some point. Do you want to know what the universe is? Look at this flower. Not, I'm going to give you a complex theory about how all of this works. And no, because the thoughts and the words and the categories, they're not going to get you there. So the emphasis is on right action or experience. When it comes to Taoism, for example, Lao Tzu is going to say, if you try to practice Taoism, you're not practicing Taoism. It's not something that you can try to do. You practice Taoism by literally going with the flow, not trying to control and grasp and understand, but just doing what you're doing, you're not worried, you're not planning. That's what it means to practice Taoism, is to go with the flow. The idea is that if everything is allowed to go its own way, the harmony of the universe will be established. And so he says, on pages 77 and 78, I know a lot of reading today. I have discussed the difference between Aristotelian and paradoxical logic in order to prepare the ground for an important difference in the concept of the love of God. The teachers of paradoxical logic say that man can perceive reality only in contradictions and can never perceive in thought the ultimate reality, unity of the one itself. This led to the consequence that one did not seek as the ultimate aim to find the answer in thought. Thought can only lead us to the knowledge that it cannot give us the ultimate answer. The world of thought remains caught in the paradox. The only way in which the world can be grasped ultimately lies not in thought, but in the act, in the experience of oneness. Thus, paradoxical logic leads to the conclusion that the love of God is neither the knowledge of God in thought, nor the thought of one's love of God, but the act of experiencing the oneness with God. This leads to the emphasis on the right way of living. All of life, every little and every important action, is devoted to the knowledge of God, but a knowledge not in right thought, but in right action. This can be clearly seen in Oriental religions. In Brahmanism, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, the ultimate aim of religion is not the right belief, but the right action. Okay. So, what this means for Fromm is that proper love does not involve having the right idea, doesn't involve having the right belief. Proper love is active. It's an activity, it's an experience, it's not conceptual, it's not based in ideas. And so, ending this chapter, since one expected to find the ultimate truth in the right thought, major emphasis was on thought, although right action was held to be important too. In religious development, this led to the formulation of dogmas, endless arguments about dogmatic formulations and intolerance of the non-believer or the heretic. It furthermore led to the emphasis on believing in God as the main aim of a religious attitude. This, of course, did not mean that there was not also the concept that one ought to live right, but nevertheless, the person who believed in God, even if he did not live God, felt himself to be superior to the one who lived God but did not believe in him. The idea that one could find the truth in thought led not only to dogma, but also to science. In scientific thought, the correct thought is all that matters, both from the aspect of intellectual honesty as well as from the aspect of the application of scientific thought to practice. In short, paradoxical thought, like we find in Eastern societies, led to tolerance and an effort towards self-transformation. The Aristotelian standpoint led to dogma and science, to the Catholic Church, and to the discovery of atomic energy. So, how we have fundamentally built up, or what we have built our thought, our philosophy on, has had lots of effects on the development of religion, science, technology, and Western society. It's allowed us to do some pretty fucking awesome things, right? But the emphasis has always been on belief, proper concept, proper knowledge, not self-transformation. And that's what we need to be focusing on, Fromm thinks. Because it's only by transforming ourselves that we're actually going to be able to love properly. So we could learn a lot from this Eastern stuff if we were not too proud to ignore it. Okay, so what do you think?
100% agree.
You like that?
Yeah.
You like that? Yeah. Say why. Why do you like it?
I think that this is a very good look at what's, I think it says, I think Aristotelian logic, as the word we're using.
Yeah.
I think that definitely led to mainstream Western thought. It says here, since one expected to find the ultimate truth in the right thought, major emphasis was on thought, although the right action was thought to be important too. In religious development, this led to the formation of dogmas. I think that this is absolutely true. I dislike Christianity for its dogma. I don't dislike Christianity for other reasons. Like, I like Christianity for a lot of reasons, but I do not like Christianity for those dogmatic reasons that I think that this is saying that they developed, and that has nothing to do with Christianity, which I agree.
Okay. Anybody else?
This is related to the last thing that you discussed. Have you ever hear about Coco the gorilla?
Yeah.
Have you seen the last video of Coco the gorilla signing off before she died?
No, I have not.
She, and this is a gorilla, sign languaging. This isn't somebody telling the gorilla to do this or anything, but the gorilla was talking about how before it died it said, Coco is flower, Coco is earth, earth is Coco, and Coco is everything. And it was like weird how like a gorilla can grasp that concept, but like
Sure.
other people just don't. You know what I mean? And I feel like if something as simple as a gorilla can grasp that concept, maybe it has some value.
Yeah. Yeah, what he's trying to get us to see is that although we've been able to do some awesome things with our concepts and our ideas, if we're actually going to do what matters in human life, which is loving, which is being godly, you might say, we need to unbind ourselves from these narcissisms and limiting concepts.
I never really had looked into Eastern philosophy before, but now I really want to.
You should
Because I feel like it addressed like a lot of the points that I kind of like had in contention to like mainstream Christianity, like, and just like Western religion in general, Catholicism, whatever.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like, I think that like, you know, like another thing is like the afterlife. Like, I feel like a lot of Western religions focus a lot on the afterlife and heaven, hell, and purgatory and whatever. And like Mormons have the whole like you create your own universe or whatever.
Oh, I would love my own planet. That would
It
be
would
sick.
be cool, but it takes a lot of wives. I'll tell you that.
I
But
got time.
like, I feel like people don't concentrate on being in this life. They're so fixated on what they can do to do better in their next life and do better in their life after death.
Yeah.
And they don't really think about like living the life that they are in and the life that they have been given. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I write stuff.
That is why in Eastern philosophy there's an emphasis on the present moment being the only thing that really exists, the eternal now. And that is what we should focus on and flow with, rather than being caught between thoughts about the past and the present, which only add anxiety and stress to our lives.
I think what I was going to say is, like, going back to what I said earlier, like, I do like this a lot, just because I think it explains the universe well, and I think also, like I was saying before, it's impossible that, or at least I believe that it's impossible that none of us, or that we're separate entities from God. I think we're all...
Yeah, so you have this kind of monistic view, right? Like,
Yeah.
kinda?
I would say, like, kind of like the law of conservation of energy, like, matter is neither created nor destroyed. It's just always changes form. And I would say God's kind of like that. There was, like, this infinite power at the beginning that kind of became aware and then just started creating infinitely. I would say.
I think a lot of atheists would agree, honestly, because it's like...
Bye, I'm really sorry. My roommate's an asshole.
You're good. Don't worry about it.
I have my astronomy professor right now. He's talking like, all right, this is what the beginning of the universe. These are current theories. This is what the end of the universe will look like, etc.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to this. It's like, okay, so well, we pretty much have conclusive evidence that the Big Bang happened, but what happened before that? And
Yeah.
a lot of philosophers or a lot of astronomers believe that it's very a possibility is that the Big Bang will just collapse and break out again. It'll just reset.
Big crunch and
Big crunch,
yeah.
reset, and it'll just be this never-ending cycle, one of which we are just in the middle of right now. And in a way, that's very much similar to a lot of these Eastern philosophies, even though it's based on like complete science rather than.
Right. Yeah, interesting how science has hypothesized some of the same things that, Eastern mysticism has come up with as well. Separately, independently, right? Yeah. Well, final questions, comments on this? What we're looking at next week is how Fromm thinks that the way that we've organized society and the concepts that we are using and relying on are preventing us from mastering the art of love and loving. So that's what we'll be looking at. And then his ideas on, well, how can we become better lovers? How can we do this better? All right, so I will let you go then.